Anatase. Despite her blessing, Anatase could not shake the foreboding feeling any time Celestine came around. The princess was as upbeat and supportive as she had been in Trelia, but her aura had entirely changed. Where she had previously radiated wholesome joy, now she exuded intense pain and suffering. When Anatase asked her how she fared away from home, she said she was enjoying the experience. How could that possibly be true when she reeks of agony? Perhaps it was excruciating for Celestine to separate from the life she had always known, and she simply chose to focus on the positive aspects of the experience. Part of Anatase wondered if the princess had been replaced. Perhaps a shifter had taken on the princess's likeness as their own, but that seemed unlikely. Anatase was wildly confused, but since Celestine had joined them, Basil had been merrier and just the slightest bit more mature. She would be happy for Basil while unraveling Celestine's intentions. There wasn't much else to do in the Isle. There were no festivals taking place, and the lack of signs made shopping difficult, as there was no way to tell when shops were open or even what they sold. The city was also impossible to navigate. On more than one occasion, Anatase had hoisted herself up to the rooftops and run back to camp across the untouched snow atop the covered shingles. With little to interest her in the city, Anatase spent most of her time camped outside with Brusite and Teleost, whenever Teleost wasn't tending to administrative duties in the frosted castle. Given the terrain surrounding the city, the hunting prospects were equally dismal. The only creatures out there were ground rodents, and she couldn't squeeze into their burrows to track them down as the Arctic foxes could. She once tried waiting them out in tall snowbanks, but on its path to a white shrew, her arrow broke on a chunk of ice. Another time, she waited by a hole for a snow rabbit to appear, but nothing emerged. She assumed the creature could sense her shadow through the ice. Regardless of her positioning, she could not dissolve her shade. Even at night, the animals always knew she was there, and popped out another hole from their warren instead. When she returned at the end of her third failed hunting trip, Jasper had smugly shared 4 of his rosemary-seasoned rabbits with Brusite and Teleost, saving the last for her. As soon as she saw the meal sitting on the spit over the flame, Anatase demanded, "How could you catch anything out there?" "I trained with the best hunters in every land, not just the Kerry. I trained with the cave dwellers, sky hunters, and ice crawlers alike." He wore the most arrogant smile she had ever seen in her life. She looked to Brusite, but he withheld his opinion on the matter with a deadpan. Abandoning her pride, she followed suit and drained the outrage from her expression. "Thank you. Can you teach me how to hunt the rabbits here?" "If I could, I would, but I cannot. It is an ability that my mother passed down to me from our heritage." At first, Anatase planned on rebuking his statement, but then halted. His father's current wife was not Jasper's mother, but that was the only information recorded for his father's region of Demse in the recent familial lineage logs. Anatase wasn't certain whether Jasper's mother was still alive. She didn't push the topic in case it was a sore one for him. Brusite was not so delicate. "I don't know anything about your mother, Jasper. Does she exist in this plane still?" Anatase winced at the forward remark. "She does. She resides in Ferdin."
"Why doesn't she live with your father?"
Teleost asked, in between bites of his roasted rabbit. "She prefers the company of academics rather than merchants. Like Brusite's families, my father's manor is on a trading port, and she finds traders disagreeable."
"That's an odd reason."
Teleost took no care to be sensitive. "She has grander aspirations than to be a lady. She has a desire for constant learning, and I cannot fault her for it. I spent my time living between my parents' care, and I appreciate why she would not sacrifice the life she has built in favor of my father's company." Anatase thought the situation peculiar. It gave her a mix of feelings of freedom and melancholy.
"Did they still care for one another when they separated?"
Teleost asked, invested in the story. "They parted on amicable terms." Anatase didn't want to touch the subject, feeling awkward asking about Jasper's parents. She stared at the rabbit that resided on the spit, but she didn't want to draw the conversation's attention to herself by getting up to turn the meat. "Did your mother remarry?" Brusite asked. "Not to my knowledge."
"She's missing out on the right man, then," Teleost said.
"I'll be sure to tell her that the next time I see her," Jasper chuckled.
"I'll tell her myself."
"She'd burn you alive before you finished speaking." Teleost raised his eyebrows, unafraid of the challenge. "It's strange to think about Jasper's family. He's always been so closed off, but learning about his past grounds him, if just the slightest bit. Seeing him vulnerable, discussing personal information humanizes him too. Where the entire sect of her tribe had raised her, she pitied him for not being raised by both of his parents together. It must have been lonely, especially so when he came to train with us and attempted to break into our tight-knit community. When Jasper noticed her considering him, he gave her a longing glance. Then his expression sobered. I should get going. Hope all of you enjoy the rabbits. What was that look for? She nearly stopped to ask, but it had surprised her into silence. Some long-forgotten memory tugged at the edges of her mind.
Anatase, your rabbit will burn.
Teleos gestured to the untouched meat. The creature was little more than a thin scrap of fur, but she wouldn't waste any of it. She had too often known the hunger accompanying prolonged snowstorms.
I like Jasper. We should ask him to eat with us more often, especially if he brings food with him,
Teleos said, licking his fingers. Maybe. Crusade exchanged a look with Anatase. She stripped the meat from the bones. He's an N rank. I don't know if he'd want to associate with us T ranks.
He just fed us, Teleos said. How many others of any rank do that?
As an afterthought, he turned to Anatase and added,
Aside from you.
Anatase drummed her fingers against her ribs. Go ahead and invite him if you want, then.
I will. I like not having to eat the mush the cooks prepare from the scraps the hunters find. Apologies if that's such a controversial opinion.
It's fine, Teleost. Crusade nudged an outer log onto the diminutive fire with his boot.
I'm going to go hang out with the S-ranks. I'll see you guys later.
Enjoy, Crusade called. When it was just Crusade and Anatase alone, Crusade asked if she wanted to retire to their shared tent. She agreed. I wanted to give you something. He looked at her with anticipation. What for? Because I want to. This is the sort of thing your people do, correct? Give presents throughout the rotation as necessary? She was pleased he had remembered. What is it? Her eyes scanned his pockets for lumps. He withdrew a white leather band. A hair tie. I lost my last one. I know. I meant to give it to you earlier, but it took longer to make than I thought. I love it. Thank you. Do leather ties pull at your hair? It's not so bad. They did, but she didn't want him to think she hated another one of his presents, especially one she desperately needed. I can teach you how to tie a new type of knot to prevent the strain. She straightened, intrigued. I learned it from the sailors back home. They use this knot to relieve tension in the ship's ropes so they don't break. He weaved the leather around separate bands of her hair, such that it would hold, but would not wrench. Then he showed her how to undo it so it wouldn't rip out her strands. She practiced a half-dozen times before her muscle memory caught on. Thank you, Crusade. I love that my hair lays flatter along my back. It'll be easier to pin with my hair fork as well. This was a good one, then. Very much so. She kissed him in gratitude, amazed at what he had come up with. The next day, Basil and Celestine returned to the campsite. What are you both doing here? Anatase asked when she noticed them with time. Why aren't you enjoying the castle? Celestine glanced between Basil and Anatase with concern in her eyes. Celestine's worried that a transportation mage is stalking her, Basil said. He might try to kidnap her. Oh, shit. The tale of the transportation mage who had transported and imprisoned important relations for ransom swelled in Anatase's mind and stirred a deep sense of dread within her gut. You can't go back, Anatase instructed before anyone else could respond. We'll keep a constant watch on you here, as the others did for me. Even if Anatase was wary of Celestine, it was her first impulse to protect the princess from a potential kidnapping. She would do the same for anyone, but especially for someone who is part of their group now. Thank you. I cannot tell you how much it means to me. Would it be safer for you to return to Trelia? Crusade asked, concerned. Master Azimuth could transport you back there safely. She shook her head. I do not know if I can trust Master Azimuth. Frightened tears slowly streaked down her face. She trembled like a baby field mouse in a blizzard. Anatase moved to embrace Celestine in comfort. If she were in the same situation, it would have been what she wanted. The princess returned the hug with more force than Anatase anticipated. The girl must be terrified out of her mind. I appreciate that more than you could know. When you sleep, you'll sleep with me in my tent, Basil said. That way, when someone senses something wrong, I'll be right there to step in and help. The transportation mage also might make a mistake and displace me instead of you in their confusion,
This is all too much. From all of you. I just need to get out of the frosted castle and away from Gia's transportation mages for a while.
We'll do it just in case, Crusade affirmed. Teleost frowned, probably at the notion of having to stay up in shifts again, but didn't audibly complain. I hope once we leave Gia, the threat will pass. You should be safe once we reach the impenetrable castle, Basil said reassuringly. He squeezed her hand in solidarity. I'll take the first watch tonight. Anatase wouldn't let a terrible fate befall the princess. That evening, Jasper returned with additional rabbits. 7 this time. 1 for each person in attendance around the fire. You don't have any suggestions on how to hunt in the plains? Anatase asked casually. Lie down over the ice. If your shadow is too dark in one spot, they'll recognize that you're a predator waiting for them. If you spread out, you might pass for a cloud. How did I not think of that? You've only had a few days to try different techniques. Gian hunters have had thousands of rotations to master theirs. Slowly, the group parted for their evening rest. When it was just Anatase and Jasper left around the fire, he offered, I'll take the first watch instead if you need to sleep. How did you know I was going to stay up? I keep track of what happens with all of you. I've told you that before. Would you like me to stay or not? I can keep you company if you don't feel comfortable letting me take your place. It was strange for him to be nice. It didn't feel disingenuous, but he had always been emotionally distant. A few nights of shared dinner over the fire couldn't change a person that quickly. I'll be okay on my own, but thank you for the offer. Maybe another time, then. Sure. Even if Jasper was being considerate, it still made Anatase uncomfortable to be alone with him. She wasn't sure why. She knew he wouldn't physically harm her, but still. Maybe she just wanted to avoid another lecture about remaining vigilant. Anatase sat alone with too many thoughts. She looked to the stars despite the glow of the city. They sat as frozen in place as she was to the fire before her. After a few turns of the moons, the crackling of the flame sounded eerily like the splatter of plump raindrops. It was second moon high when the princess crawled from Basil's borrowed tent. Celestine had draped a modest blanket covering over her silk sleeping chemise. May I sit with you? I cannot sleep. Certainly, but I can assure you that you're perfectly safe if that's why you're restless. It is not that. When I first learned of the transportation mage's interest, I admit I did fear for more than mere kidnapping, Celestine said with a heaviness she didn't usually display. For what else might follow? Anatase understood all too well. The princess's words evoked the sensation of a gripping force encircling Anatase's ankles as she recalled being ripped from her tent in the night. A long-repressed memory of a cave's dead end edged into her mind as well, but Anatase refused to let it fully form before her eyes. She refocused on Celestine. If that's not causing you trouble, then what is? I see you as a friend, but I worry that you do not see me as such. Anatase had 2 choices before her. Tell the princess the truth, in that a terrifying presence radiated from her, or lie and say all was well. She avoided the truth. I'm just slow to warm up to others. Please don't take offense at it. It would be the same for anyone. I remember you said something similar earlier. Celestine didn't elaborate further. I'm coming around, Anatase reassured her. Can I ask you something? Hesitantly, Anatase agreed. Where do you believe the soul resides in the body? It wasn't what Anatase had anticipated, but she wasn't surprised by the nature of the question. Celestine had been inquiring about similarly eccentric topics since they'd met. I think it moves, like that old poem. When I see the sunrise, my soul is in my eyes. When I tend to the land, my soul is in my hands. It feels the same when I'm hunting or eating or climbing. It's wherever I'm focusing my attention. Why? I had been pondering the poem, and it made me curious. And you? Anatase asked. It's in my spine and nerves, all at the same time. I feel it as the temperature in the air. The pressure is acting on my skin and muscles when I sit, and the weight of supporting my limbs every moment. It reminds me of my humanity. Anatase shifted where she sat. Why do you think of such peculiar questions? Why would I not? Do you not enjoy considering the atypical subjects of the world? I don't feel a need to. Celestine glanced around the sky before meeting her gaze. Does the world not feel depthless without wonder? Each day I'm trying to survive until tomorrow. I don't have energy to spare on philosophy. How tragically insubstantial. Pity leaked through Celestine's stare. Anatase huffed.
I don't lament over what I don't require.
You do not care for any philosophy. Do not contemplate matters of state, methods of governance, for instance.
I will not ascend my mother's title, so I do not.
But you may. You are second-born. Perhaps you will serve as a trusted advisor to your sister.
Anatase snorted and crossed her arms.
I would honor my younger sister's counsel, Celestine said.
You have a very different relationship with her than I do with my sister.
How so?
You'll do a decent job ruling Ikasu, and your sister will likely recognize that. My sister, Kunzite, on the other hand, would have as much difficulty navigating her way out of a drunken orgy as she would to the far borders of our territory. Celestine looked away. Think I'm too harsh?
No, I understand that all people are different, so I believe you.
No comforting words of wisdom?
I cannot judge your sister or her actions. She may be justified in her choices. I could never know. For you, though, we do not get to choose our family, and we should not be forced to retain toxic relations, whatever form that may take.
Anatase stared at the young woman, nearly a decade younger than herself. I can't turn my back on my people. If she ascends, someone will need to guide them. They'll need to negotiate sect boundaries, divvy out daily hunting responsibilities, ensure the children receive proper training to become full-fledged Sokoli, and maintain relations with the nobility of the regions surrounding our land. Else she'll run our tribe poorly until someone murders her for control of it.
So you have thought about governing.
Anatase flicked her gaze back toward the fire. While I know my sister is unfit to rule, I do not believe she deserves to die for it.
You would lead for her, do all the work, and receive none of the credit.
I don't need credit, not from those who would misplace it with her, the outsiders and such.
What if her child becomes the next king or queen of Vetron because of your sacrifice?
Then her bloodline can be trapped in a foreign city. Celestine gave Anatase a measuring glance.
You could request your mother to name you as the heir apparent over your sister.
I would never disrespect my mother's judgment. She can decide for herself if she sees me fit.
You could always make yourself a more attractive heir, although I suppose by serving in the king's army and making foreign connections with princesses and high-ranking lords, you are doing exactly that.
Anatase blushed. That had been her intention, and she was ashamed it was so evident to Celestine.
I do not think any less of you for it. It is a noble cause to attempt to salvage the life of a sibling who is strayed toward a dangerous reckoning. I would hope my sister would do the same for me.
Anatase considered thanking her. A moment later, Celestine said,
I'll have better luck sleeping now. I appreciate your company and your sleepless night.
Anatase nodded curtly. She didn't know how to feel toward the unsettling princess, but she would endure this shift until its end. At the end of the Crusade's stay in Yael, they moved out at first light. The suns were intense blood oranges, suspended in a pastel rainbow. The assortment of colors competed to be heard in the sky as much as in the echo along the ice. After a couple of turns of the suns, the path returned to a pine forest where the group broke for their midday meal. Even after applying Jasper's hunting advice, Anatase had failed to catch any rabbits, so she had decided to return to her customary hunting techniques. Hiking to a secluded section of the forest, she was about to climb a tree when she heard a noise behind her. She expected it to be Jasper, the way it had snuck up on her. It wasn't Jasper. The person used her momentary astonishment to grab her by the back of the neck. Anatase's immediate fear flashed to the Vahantry had they returned to slay more soldiers who strayed from the path. "Where's the princess, you barbarous cunt?" The person, she assumed to be male, was massive. There were no extra sets of footprints in the snow around her. It must be the transportation mage hunting Celestine. "You won't get her," Anatase barked. Even exhausted from the lack of sleep, and without any of her weapons drawn, she could kill the mage instantly. They were in her element. The mage pressed downward on her neck, and she used his force against him. She jolted forward in his grip's direction to make him overextend. With her arm raised, she swiveled to break his now tenuous hold. Continuing through her turn, she jabbed her hand through the mage's neck. As was the tradition with all Sokoli, the bones of her fingertips had been sharpened into daggers as a weapon of final resort. It hurt like bloody stars to use them as such, and it left her prone to contracting any blood-borne diseases her victim had. But she hadn't had the time to draw any of her other weapons. The mage did not react before she removed her filed digits from his windpipe. Blood bubbled from the trachea and dyed the surrounding snow. The body convulsed until it had run out of either air or liquid. She wasn't certain which came first. The only thing she looted from the mage's corpse was his tunic. she ripped pieces of the fabric to tend to her skewered fingertips. Her bone whites poked through her split skin before her blood covered them. Nausea rolled over her stomach, but it hadn't been the first time she had resorted to such measures. She wasn't accustomed to the painful sensation, but she knew what to expect. She wrapped her fingers in the strips until blood ceased to seep through. "Go to Basil. Get that fixed immediately. I can't have your dominant hand shredded." Jasper's voice frightened her. "I suppose you don't care to know how it happened?" "I sensed it happen. You're an idiot to let that heal on its own." "You heard he was after Celestine, then?" "Yes, it was fortunate for her that you handled him before he approached the campsite. Now go and get that fixed up. I'll dispose of the body. We shouldn't associate you with another corpse, especially of a Gian mage, and especially without the protection of D4. "Fine." She didn't bother to argue. It was difficult enough to make the bandages one-handed, let alone tie them to staunch the bleeding properly. And he wasn't wrong about the risk. As she walked away, Jasper spoke again, but his voice projected away from her. Anatase hid instinctively behind the nearest pine. She couldn't distinguish Jasper's words, only his angry tone. Anatase risked leaning away from the cover of her tree to see who he spoke to. Between the nettles, his face looked as dangerous as a wild animal's as he faced Celestine. What is she doing out here in the woods by herself? What is she thinking doing something so reckless? No wonder the mage appeared where he had. Perhaps Jasper is chiding her for that decision now. Anatase couldn't hear Celestine's words either, but she responded to Jasper's agitation with a collected calm. After a short conversation with the princess, Jasper headed in Anatase's direction. He made the carry sign for enough noise tightly in front of his abdomen so Celestine would not see it. The princess departed back toward the crusade shortly after. When Jasper passed Anatase, he shot her a terrifying glance that read, "Don't you dare ask what just transpired." She desperately wanted to know what had happened, but she restrained herself. She curled up, trying to be as small and unnoticeable as possible, until enough time passed for Celestine and Jasper to return to camp. In the intermedium, she clutched the cloth to her fingertips and focused on the pain in her ripped tissue. Once she was confident she could move freely, she navigated back to the group after they had packed up from their midday meal. "Oh, Basil, what happened, Anatase?" Bruce had asked when he saw her bloodied bandage. Celestine had returned to Basil's side. "How terrible," Celestine said. It was all Anatase could do not to send a hesitant glance toward her. Until she could safely speak with Jasper alone, she'd pretend she hadn't seen the princess in the woods. Putting her pride away, Anatase asked Basil, "Can you heal this? It's not clotting as I hoped it would." He had already moved to examine her damaged flesh. "Sutaya Thveri," he cast, concentrating exclusively on her hand. The skin sealed over anew, but the spell did not repair the scars she had previously earned. "Thank you, Basil." "So, are you going to tell us?" Taliast asked. She had to consider how she would behave if she had just killed the mage and hadn't witnessed the princess' interaction with Jasper. Anatase should still only harbor a mild mistrust toward the princess and act as though she had just defended the princess's life. Anatase could live with herself if the man were trying to kidnap a royal for his own financial or perverse gains. As far as Anatase was concerned, that much was still valid. She decided not to think about it further. "I was attacked by a transportation mage. He had been looking for Celestine." "I do not believe it," Celestine exclaimed. "Are you all right otherwise?" "I'm okay. I expect you won't need to worry anymore." Anatase tried her best to maintain an even tone. "Does that mean he's no longer living?" Astonishment crept into Celestine's voice. "Yes."
"Good. The bastard deserves to rot in damnation when his spawn dies," Telios said.
"Even if it means damning good people with him?" Basil asked skeptically. Bruce looked as if he had a similar question on his mind as he nodded in agreement.
"It's a stupid system. Spawn deal the same fate to their friend as to the person who killed their friend. Humanity shouldn't be judged collectively."
"You'd end up with partial angel, partial demon hybrids otherwise. Besides, that's just not possible." Bruce closed an eye as though picturing such a creature. "Our system likely leans the scales towards the salvation of the many. It speaks to a spawn's ability to forgive and provide mercy." Celestine's voice gritted in Anatase's ears.
"Well, sure, that's how angelus priests say it should work. I'm saying we should protest whoever made it and tell them to start over."
"Are you talking about the Rhysic gods? I don't believe they have the authority to counter any archangel or demon." Basil said. Anatase had no idea what Basil meant regarding gods. It seemed like silly semantics to her anyway. Given that she had just killed a man, she was irritated that they were debating the ethics of it in front of her. With each comment, unwanted guilt surged into her heart.
No, not them either. Perhaps we should get the dimension hoppers to displace us into a dimension that's fairer than this one.
Basil opened his mouth to interject again, but Bursite said, "Who's to say that even if you died in another dimension, your soul wouldn't travel back here for final judgment, or to whatever dimension our ghosts live in?"
I don't know, Talios said. It's a marvel any dimension hoppers are here at all. Who would ever want to visit such a place and risk damnation with a bunch of cowardly humans? They are not judged like the rest of us, just as the harpies and the Raisigli and the sea folk are not. By all written accounts, traveling here yields no potential spiritual peril to themselves, Celestine said.
Talios scoffed.
Well, if I were a transportation mage, I'd get myself to another dimension. And before all you say that they can't transport between dimensions only within one, I know. But I would sure like the chance to find something better.
There is something to be said of improving the conditions of one's home first before seeking out something greater, Celestine said. That is partially why the dimension hoppers mostly stay on their home planet, despite the lucrative nature of transporting other species between worlds.
I don't see how we can improve our circumstances on our own, Talios said. I mean, it's not like anything I do is going to influence what aldehyde or ketone or ether decide for me.
The only way you can improve anything is to live as best as you see fit, seizing happiness at every opportunity and not denying it of others, Basil said. Celestine watched him curiously.
That's not enough. Talios curled a fist in front of his mouth. We should have control over how our eternities end.
That's the best we got, Basil said.
Talios muttered. It's stupid.
Until you've done all you can do, don't complain about wanting an opportunity for more. The kingdom of Devor announced itself plainly over the horizon. The sky beyond streaked in dark reds, browns, and oranges. Lead-colored clouds allowed little natural light through, opposite of the open, icy blue skies of Gia. The twisting billows delivered an ominous feeling. The crusade marched into the maws of Mlau. As they neared, dim yellow lights shone in less dense patches of vapor, but only served as a contrast against the darker shadows, rather than providing an illumination source for the ground below. Anatase couldn't believe the weather intentionally looked like a manifestation of the accursed ruins. Such dramatic climate manipulations probably caused Gia's equally harsh, though opposite, weather. Anatase couldn't smell the land yet, but fortunately, they'd be spared breathing the ashen air of Devor. Basil had confided in their group that his master had learned enough weather magic to protect them from the worst of the Devorian atmosphere. She had no idea how the crusade party would make it to Coserai otherwise. They'd all constantly be choking and catching their breath. The merchant road had been lined with the heat-resistant hide of a monstrous molten Tarrasque, but it didn't prevent lava streams from running atop it. Thanks to Master Watercress, they stepped on freshly hardened rock rather than the live magma. Even with the barrier, the air grew hot and dry, and they required frequent breaks to raid their water rations. Beyond the weather barrier, glowing lava streams rippled across the ground. Anything that could have burned had charcoaled. Still, few plants like fire pepper and the victorious igneous flower thrived in the extreme environment. A few flaming salamanders crawled along the crags in the distance, and more than once, Anatase had stepped atop the seemingly indestructible shells of volcano snails. She hoped Jasper would be more knowledgeable of the fauna because she would not attempt to hunt foreign beasts in the unfamiliar terrain away from the Crusade's miniature protective weather barrier. Given the change in terrain, the Crusade trekked faster than their plod through Gia and Vetron, but slower than they had through the grassy plains of Ikasu. Anatase knew she would sleep easily for the duration of their stay. Even the Vahantri wouldn't be insane enough to pursue them through such an extreme environment. But, isolated from breathing in the ashen air and feeling the boiling temperatures, there was a beauty to the flaming earth and sky surrounding them. At least, it made for a fascinating march. For the first turn of the suns, Basil had put Time's lessons on hold while he beheld tumbles of fuming clouds and torrents of pulsing lava. The Crusade had to pause at the first village they passed to refill their water rations from the town's hot springs. Structures serving as homes sat atop pumice, Out of reach of the flowing molten rivers below them, nearly everything was made of hardened black magma, or Terraske hide. Metallic suspension bridges connected one residence or shop to another. Even with flare-ups, the bridges sat high enough away from the heat to permit safe passage. Underneath the village looked to be an impressive kiln sculpted from the earth. Anatase hadn't known much about metallurgy, but she recognized that having such high temperatures served to the village's crafting advantage. The whole place was off-putting to Anatase. She wanted to return to her normalcy of evergreens on an untouched sheet of snow under a clear sky. She noticed a couple workers take pickaxes into a quarry. Lau himself would have to drag me into one of those tunnels. I'd never enter them willingly. The status of the ground gave Anatase a strong enough disinclination. If it weren't for the promise of the hot springs water, she wouldn't risk veering from the merchant road at all. But there wasn't anything to be done for it. Telios' first sergeant called him away to help reload the empty barrels sitting in the oxen carts. When the rest of them were preparing to go, Basil said to Celestine, "I don't think the major generals would want you to risk venturing out of the weather barrier. I'll refill your water skin for you." She seemed as though she wanted to protest, but she acquiesced and handed over her water sack. "Thank you, Basil. That is kind of you to offer." He gave her a sweet little smile and left her side. Brucite, Basil, Anatase, and Thyme departed from the protection of the weather barrier and embarked on the hot trek to the upper reaches of the stifling village's crags. The air irritated Anatase's lungs, but she endured it. They followed at the back of the rest of the crusade, so they'd have a while before they reached the boiling pools, but none of them had wanted to wait behind the oxen carts. The progress was slow, but the higher they climbed, the easier the air was to breathe. Anatase certainly noticed each of them coughing less. Once they reached the top, Anatase dunked her leather skin in one of the pools immediately. She was fast enough that her skin didn't blister, but her sack filled. Brucite and Thyme were a bit more hesitant and were slowly filling theirs with gentle passes through the water. Basil hadn't even started. He kept repositioning it above the water as though he were trying to imagine a method of scooping the water without a risk of getting splashed. When he cast a spell to aid the process, she scoffed. "What?" he asked as he plucked the quickly melting chunk of ice from the pool and set it inside his pouch. Basil wiped the negligible residue from his fingers on his trousers. "Your over-reliance on magic is astounding," she said, shaking her head, disgusted. As an ox head crested onto the ridge, Anatase intended to leave to provide the soldiers sufficient room to fill the barrels. But a burp of lava exploded near the beast, spooking it. Panicked, the ox bucked and plunged off the edge of the trail. The cart it carried followed over the edge along with the rider and many of the Crusade's ration barrels. Anatase wasn't sure if it was the vibration of the falling cart or the explosion of lava, but from the back of the hot spring, a molten Terraske emerged and charged toward the nearest target, which happened to be Basil. "I need a sword!" Brucite sprinted back toward the other carts, presumably to check if there was a spare blade rolling around. As he passed Thyme, the kid grabbed the throwing dagger shoved in Brucite's boot and lined himself up to toss it at one of the Terraske's 6 legs. Basil stared dumbly at the monster. Anatase shifted with as much speed as she ever had to intercept the creature before it reached him. Basil muttered something unintelligible behind her as she readied to plant one of her own daggers into the hide between the tough shell plating. The Terraske opened its maws and blasted flames at Anatase. She couldn't avoid them, lest she'd risk Basil to front the blow. She pounded the pool water as her last resort, hoping it'd create enough of a shield, but she suspected the liquid would do little to slow the advance of the flames. Yet the fire stopped just short of her behind a defensive barrier. She turned to Basil, expecting him to be gloating, but he was staring at the beast as he prepared another spell. He held his master's thin dagger tightly in his hands, but it didn't seem like he intended to fight with the tightening weapon if he didn't have to. Realizing it couldn't move past the defensive barrier, the Terraske swiped at the space ahead of it with the long claws of its forelegs. Anatase repositioned herself in an area amongst the pools that had decent footing so she could fling herself at the beast once it discovered a way around the barrier. When it came, Thyme tossed his borrowed dagger at the animal's tiny, beady eye. Unfortunately, the metal bounced off the armor, protecting the Terraske's cheek. Anatase pushed Thyme back, trying to signal for him to get out of the area before she sprung onto the creature's back. Though she grabbed one of the shell spikes in her hands, she caught another of the spires in her calf. It roared with the addition of her weight and squirmed to try and hit her with its tail, but the armored appendage didn't bend that way. She plunged her dagger into the Terraske's back several times, but it didn't seem to slow the beast much. If she hadn't been stuck, she would have tried crawling up closer to its neck to sink the blade into a more vital spot. Then again, she suspected she would have already been thrown off the creature's shell if she hadn't been pinned to it. Basil's next barrier defended time as the boy dove for Brucite's knife, and the Tarrasque tried to burn him along his side. "Get out of here, Time!" Anatase couldn't worry about him. Despite her repetitive plunging, she seemed like she was acting as little more than a nuisance to the creature. Her weight slowed it, which was something, but otherwise, she was only succeeding at soaking herself in its blood. A flying sword turned point over hilt until it struck close to the animal's neck. In a streak of bad luck, the beast turned just as the sword would have taken it in the neck. She was awestruck by the precision of such a clunky weapon. "Brucite?" Jasper appeared to retrieve the blade. "I should have known." "Then where the hell is Brucite? Has he still not found a weapon?" As Jasper pulled out the stuck sword, the Tarrasque unleashed another volley of flames at Basil, who had only been about halfway through his spell to cast his barrier. Anatase tried using her body weight to roll the creature out of alignment before it shot, so the fire would miss Basil. The tearing of her calf muscle burned like bloody stars, but she forced as much leverage as she could. It wasn't enough. She was terrified that she was about to watch the healing mage burn where he stood. Again, Time's dagger bounced off the shell of the Tarrasque, in a comical undertone to the direness of Basil's situation. The flames blasted toward Basil. Jasper pivoted as though he were about to lunge into the fire, but from the magma a streak of fire grew to intercept the jet. Anatase didn't know what she was looking at. She didn't bother to figure it out. She assumed Watercress or another mage had arrived to help. As soon as it was clear Basil was safe, Jasper refocused his attention on the implanted sword. Anatase tried sawing around the hide plating, hoping to expose a larger area and to dig her metal deeper into the creature's internal organs. She shoved her arm through the hole she had managed to carve and sliced through whatever she could reach. The Tarrasque flailed its clawed legs and plaited tail, but it could not spare itself from death. Erratic flames sprouted from its mouth, but all were consumed. The danger ended when Jasper forced his sword into the base of the creature's brain. Anatase waited for the Tarrasque to go fully limp before she tried prying herself free. She didn't want to cause any further damage to her leg if she could spare herself the pain. Jasper and Basil both were at her side in the next moment. Basil was conjuring his diagnostic tome. "Are you okay?" Jasper asked desperately. Anatase assumed Jasper was being condescending again. "Of course I'm okay," she said before she coughed up the tainted air. "I just need my leg fixed." Reluctantly, she looked to Basil while she pulled herself free from the Tarrasque. "Forgive my concern," Jasper said with indignation. "You're coated in blood and you weren't moving." "I suppose that would give the wrong impression, especially given Basil's similar distress." Anatase was grateful Basil kept his numbing magic concentrated on her leg as she worked it free from the spire. But she still had more questions for Jasper. "How did you get here so fast?" "I saw the Tarrasque on the backside of the crags. I climbed up after it, hoping to intercept it before it reached the spires." She didn't believe him. "You climbed up?" With the situation calming, the tension Jasper had kept in his expression dropped away. With a smug smile, he said, "I did. It's an excellent exercise for strength training. You should try it. Anyway, I'm going to help with the remaining oxen carts. Basil, when you're done with Anatase's treatment, you have someone waiting to speak with you." Jasper gestured to the living flame waiting patiently beside their cluster. "Is that what saved Basil?" "Oh," Basil said as he noticed them. What's your name?" Time approached the fluid flame that consolidated into a humanoid's shape, with blazing horns and spurts of embers shooting out from their extremities. The boy waved at the fire elemental, and they waved back. Just as Jasper walked toward the path leading back to the heart of the village, Brucite came sprinting up, sword in hand. He switched his baffled gaze between Jasper, the slain Tarrasque, Anatase, Basil, Time, and the friendly fire creature. He sprinted toward the elemental with his sword raised. "No, Brucite!" Basil called. Time held out his hands to defend them. Clearly still confused, Brucite halted and lowered his sword. "Is it not a threat?" From the corner of her eye, Anatase noticed Jasper grin again as he continued down the slope. She wasn't sure what his expression was in response to specifically, but it annoyed her regardless. "Their name's Harai, and no, they aren't a threat." How does Basil know that? As far as Anatase could tell, Harai hadn't responded to his question. The freshwater elemental that lived near her family's residence never answered her either, so she expected Harai to remain mute. To her knowledge, it was only the populous saltwater elementals of the sea who bothered conversing with other species. Even they seemed to dislike speaking with humans, though. After a period of silence, Basil said, "I appreciate your offer. All of my friends and I do." "You understand it?" Crusade asked. "I can sense what they want to tell me," Basil said. "I know they didn't speak aloud. I just know." "What did it communicate, other than its name?" Crusade asked. "Horai will accompany us." Anatase was bewildered that a fire elemental had randomly decided to defend Basil and then accompany him. "Does no one else find this entirely bizarre?" Crusade asked. Anatase nodded, and Time studied the fascinating being silently. "No, Horai feels familiar, like an old friend." Basil wore a little smile as he spoke. "I find their offer to be a comforting gesture in an uncomfortable place." Anatase looked from Crusade to Time, curious about Basil's mental state, but while her leg was too damaged to run, she wouldn't risk offending the elemental. "It is nice to meet you, Horai," Celestine said when they returned from the hot springs and explained the situation to Teleos and Celestine. Horai nodded their semblance of an eyeless head to her from the other side of Master Watercress's barrier. They were unable to maintain a humanoid flaming form inside it. Each time they crossed from the fiery Devorian landscape into the temperate space, their fires sputtered out, and they were forced to select a tangible shape, such as that of a salamander or a phoenix. So they accepted the separation and strolled about a pace away from the rest of the group.
"This fucking place," Teleos swore, shaking his head. "No offense, Basil, but why did Horai approach you at all?"
Basil shrugged. "Perhaps because I can understand them?" Anatase was perplexed, but her gut tied the truth of the encounter to Watercress's secret. She didn't want to put the thought into words, but she suspected Horai to be Basil's legendary beast companion. Beyond that, Anatase had other questions to ponder. She didn't understand how Jasper could pass Crusade while he sought out a sword without Crusade's notice. That path was fairly narrow. He shouldn't have been able to slip past undetected, no matter how quiet he had been about it. Crusade would have seen him. There was a chance that Jasper had told the truth about climbing up the backside of the crags, but it seemed so unlikely that he could arrive quickly enough, given the timeline. She knew he had accomplished impressive feats before, but this felt different. Even if he had been listening to her and Basil, the Terraskay had only emerged after the lava burst from the spring. It all had happened too fast. There wasn't even time for Crusade to find a sword before it had ended, and Jasper had arrived midway through. While thinking back, she also wondered about the moment when Jasper had appeared ready to jump into the flames. Why would he think he would stand a chance against jets of fire? Was he just as ready to sacrifice himself for Basil as I was? Is Jasper that loyal to King Citrine to protect Basil at the expense of his own life? Does he also suspect Basil as being the Archspawn? Interrupting her musings, Watercress bolted over to them, his sapphire cloak flying out behind him. As soon as he found Basil, Watercress halted and placed a hand to his chest, as though trying to calm his racing heart. "Thank Hiksuk. I heard what happened." "We're all fine, Master," Basil said as he glanced between his friends in the circle. "We figured it out together." Anatase would disagree with Basil's assessment. Her leg wasn't fully healed yet, but she didn't want to come across as being ungrateful by embarrassing him in front of his master. Master Watercress appeared as though he had wanted reassurance, perhaps to hug Basil, but his apprentice was wedged deeply amongst the group, and Basil hadn't bothered to edge his way over to properly greet him. After managing to catch his breath, the master began to awkwardly back away. As an afterthought, Watercress mentioned, "There's been another issue as well." "What's that?" "The Devorian Regional Army has arrived. D2 has taken control of the Crusade." "Just until Coserai, though, right?" Basil asked. "It won't be for long." "True, but D2 only brought half the forces that Devor was assigned to bring." Everyone exchanged anxious glances. Between the Terraskay attack, her injured leg, and the new questions she had about Jasper, Anatase was ready to return to a boring routine. She hadn't needed another issue that they'd potentially have to resolve later. "What will all of this mean for us?" Anatase fretted, finding out.